Okay, we're going to start our meeting. Welcome to the September Curriculum Committee meeting. I'm going to call the meeting to order and start by seeing if we have any public comment for tonight. And we do not have any public comments for tonight. So moving on to our committee responses, which we'll have none because we have no public comment. We can move to approving the minutes of our meeting from the August 27, 2024 work session. Feel like I looked at that a while ago. Is that possible? Did we? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I did look at that too.
Okay. Yep. So we can, okay. So we can approve our
Motion to
minutes. We don't have to.
Oh,
We
I
just-
don't need.
We just have to give it a thumbs up.
Darren, can you pass me the, uh-huh.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Agenda. Okay. Okay. So we're going to move on to, item number 4. We haven't officially elected a chairperson for our committee yet, so we need to do that tonight. So I'll open the floor to entertain any motions, if anybody would like to nominate anyone.
I nominate Adam for chairperson of the curriculum committee.
Oh, second.
I could have seconded it, I guess, but, okay. Thank you. I appreciate that nomination. I'd like to be the chairperson. All in favor of that? Okay. So, I will be continuing on as the chairperson. Thank you, guys. And tonight we have, 2 topics on our agenda. We're going to start out by, having a discussion, kind of an overview, of the different curricula that we currently have now in place and some of the assessment methodology that we have in place for the 2024-25 year. One of the things that we're working on as a district is, sort of in certain areas trying to tighten up some curricula across classes and subject areas and years in some cases. We've started that with, some reading programs last year. So today we're going to have a conversation about that. And I think, is that going to be, Lynn, are you coming down to talk about that? Okay, so we'll welcome Lynn. She will come.
So good evening, everybody. My name is Lynn Klankowski, and I am the evaluation officer here in Ithaca. I'm Mary Groper would be here to present this, but she's out of town, so I'm standing in for her. This chart we put together to really, I would say, help us focus as a kind of a district level team on what our major initiatives are this year, right? And to spell out, just to make it clear to folks what our focus is and what's in place. So you'll see 4 main buckets of work around literacy, math, student and staff well-being, and then accountability on the end. So for literacy, this has been a multi-year focus for us that we are continuing. And you'll see we've kind of divided it out between elementary and secondary. So literacy initiatives continuing are really great reading, or RGR, which is our foundational skills program at grades K through 2 or pre-K through 2, and then used as an intervention in grades 3+. We continue with that. Magnetic reading is our comprehension program that we adopted last year for grades 3 through 5. So a major focus for us this year at the elementary level is supporting the rollout and implementation of that with extensive professional development and support for teachers in the classroom. Fish tank /EL, or expeditionary learning pilot. This is for K2 when we think about a comprehension program. And we'll talk a little bit more about the pilot if we have time at the end of today's meeting or a later meeting. But this is to piloting a program to adopt for future years. Science of reading, continuing to support teachers in building knowledge around the science of reading, which is really the science of reading and writing. Again, with really, I think would say extensive and comprehensive professional development that we have planned throughout the year. And then M class is our new universal screening tool at grades K through 5 for literacy. And it replaces the Fontes and Pinnell benchmark assessment that we have been using for many, many years. So that's a big body of work for our elementary folks that we're supporting this year. And you can, if you can click on the document and see the professional development plan to support teachers in that. And we'll definitely share a lot more about this throughout the year. Secondary, we're kind of just beginning I would say a very intentional look at curriculum at our secondary level for ELA. Mary Grover is going to be running point on the secondary ELA work, curriculum alignment. That's she started by meeting with all of the department leaders, and we're going to begin with some vertical alignment work starting in October at the PLC day. I will be running point with elementary literacy and supporting the pilot and implementation there for those programs. So then math is our other big bucket. Eureka Math Squared was the math program that we adopted last year at the K through 5 level. We are continuing to support that with more PD. Teachers gave us lots of feedback about what they would like to see differently in terms of support for that program. And we are so fortunate to have Kat Nichols, who is an amazing teacher. She's teaching algebra at Ithaca High School this year, and then also serving part-time as a teacher on special assignment to support really elementary and middle school math. So she's doing a lot of professional development. She's been in staff meetings. She's meeting with teacher teams to really support teachers in differentiating Eureka Math Squared to meet kids where they're at, while ensuring that kids have access and exposure to grade level curriculum. So we're focusing a lot on pacing this year and differentiation for Eureka Math Squared. At the middle school level, they adopted Amplified Desmos as a new math curriculum. So again, Kat Nichols is doing a lot of support with that. And we have PD from Amplify themselves. They had a day this summer with all the middle school math teachers, and there will be coaching days, a coaching day in each of our secondary schools, Boynton, DeWitt, and LACS, to support teachers in that curriculum implementation this year. Let's see, yeah. So we also wanted to acknowledge that student and staff well-being is another primary focus for us, right? And continuing the work we've been doing there. And Carrie Burke is really running point on a lot of this stuff. But, you know, in addition to our CLR, our culturally linguistically responsive teaching credential, which kind of, I would say, goes across all of these, our focus on ruler as a social emotional tier 1 program in K2, restorative justice, TCIS training for teachers, and really focusing on what supports we have in place for students in terms of our school counselors and mental health support, and for our staff in terms of our EAP program, right? So really putting a focus on ensuring that we are teaching students well, right? And a focus on curriculum, but also helping all the humans in our organization to feel good about where they are and who they are. And then finally, something that we are putting a lot of energy and effort into is just thinking about how we're measuring success. How do we know what we're doing is working, and making that part of our conversations and trying to be a bit, I think, more intentional about that work and also communicating that work to folks. So we have our school improvement plans, our SEPs and our DSIP in place, right? So those we talked about at last curriculum meeting, our extensive plans with lots of specific success measures in there. So we'll be looking at those throughout the year. We have progress targets at the end of October, mid-year, and end of year, aligned to all the goals in those. thinking about APPR, annual performance reviews. There will be new regulations coming out from the state anytime now. They say fall, right? And so digging into those to really think about in collaboration with our unions. So this would have to be negotiated with the teachers union, with the IPDA, but how can we really build a performance review system that really, I think, supports and inspires continual professional growth in a meaningful and real way. Our current APPR process is I would say, largely compliance-based, right? And so this is a real opportunity for us to make it a system that we spend a lot of time on it. So a system that really, I think, yields great results and moves forward the work of teaching and learning in our district. So we're excited to really dig into that as the regs become clearer. Thinking about our assessment program. So we have our new M class, our new universal literacy screening at the elementary level, which is going to give us really specific data to monitor the number of students that are at risk of reading failure in our schools and how those students are responding to the instruction that we put in place. So a data tool that we have not had access to in the past. So we're excited about using that. And then at the secondary level, thinking about building out our assessment program through the creation of common assessments at the course level. That's a primary focus at our middle schools this year as part of their SEPs. It's not something we've had in place, so we're excited to do that work so that we can really look across classrooms and across buildings about where students are having success, where they're not, how we can learn from that to ensure that more students are meeting with success, right? Again, thinking about all of these things listed, right, over on the literacy, math, and student and staff well-being side, each of those kind of programs and projects, how are we measuring success? So thinking about our elementary literacy in year one implementation of magnetic reading and M class, largely we're focused on ensuring all teachers are participating in the professional development, keeping really great records on that. Data from walkthroughs with principals about what we're seeing in classrooms and feedback from the coaches, both from Amplify and Magnetic Reading that are in our classrooms, seeing how those programs are going. So just being more intentional about how we're measuring success. And, Carrie, Kat, Mary, we can all speak to more about specific programs down the line. And then thinking about MTSS, or multi-tiered systems of support in RTI, which is really our system of supporting students. Our data strategist at the elementary level, we had a summit this summer with teams of teachers from each building, and really bringing focus to how to bring a bit more, I would say, cohesion to our systems and ensuring that we are really tracking when kids are receiving intervention and making sure that we are coming back to the table frequently to see how that's working, right? And just getting better at those systems in our buildings. So it's a lot up there, but it actually feels really good to have it all written down. And I think there are some things you don't see there, right? Like, it doesn't mean we're not teaching science and social studies. It doesn't mean that anti-marginalization curriculum is not important. But when we think about focus and we think about how to lead really important work with fewer people at the table, this was our attempt to really get that down and ensure that we know who is running point on each, and to hold us accountable to the work. Questions?
Well, thanks for kind of walking through that. There's so much there, like a lot to unpack. I guess I just had, just one thing was coming to mind. Could you talk a little bit more about assessment? Like, so let's say like M class in elementary school, like kind of like how that, sort of like how students get assessed, and then kind of like what happens as a result of the assessment. And then maybe talking also like, and then in middle school, like obviously people are now in a very different place. Like what's the assessment like there? And then just how does the assessment inform decisions about like what's going to happen in terms of what students work on? Just like flesh it out a little bit more, just because especially with M class, that's kind of new. And I just like to hear a little more about it.
Absolutely. So MCAS is a universal screener. So I like to think of it kind of as like when you go to the doctor and they take your temperature, they take your weight, and they take your blood pressure, right? So it's a quick screening tool that takes, depending on the grade level, between 4 and 10 minutes per child to administer all the tasks, to kind of give a risk indicator based on a large national set of data about risk of reading failure or meeting benchmarks. MClass is the platform that was built by Amplify, the company, and it houses the assessment DIBELS 8. So the actual assessment is DIBELS 8. And if you Google DIBELS 8, you'll see it's a reading assessment, a universal reading screener that has been developed by the University of Oregon. Many years of robust research and validation around it. It's in its 8th version right now. And it consists of short timed tasks. So it's looking both at students' decoding accuracy and fluency. That's why the time task is there, right? So we know from research, from the science of reading, that automaticity is really critical for skilled reading, right? So it's not just knowing the sounds and how to blend them or decode them off the page, but I have to be able to do that with automaticity so that I can begin to kind of put the words together to build comprehension. So that timed aspect of it is a really new thing for us here in Ithaca. So at the early grade levels, it's a set of words. Some are nonsense words, so things like tib and wub and lack, that students are just looking at a sheet of paper and they're just decoding those or reading those words, either sound by sound or reading the whole word while the teacher follows along and just keeps track of what they're saying, right? We look at both nonsense words and real words. So those two different measures are both reading. So a real word would be like lip or sit or lick or slap, right? Again, getting more complex in the types of phonics patterns you see in those. So looking at specific decoding, and then the other aspect of it is oral reading fluency, where kids read a grade level passage at times 1 minute. How many words read accurately within that 1 minute? Oral reading fluency there's a very strong correlation. So I'm not going to say causality, right? But there's really strong correlation between performance on reading comprehension exams. There's a great study about the NAEP and the correlation between oral reading fluency scores and performance on the NAEP, which is the National Assessment of Educational Progress, right? So short time tasks, the last thing that happens with students beginning, this is testing my knowledge, I think it's grade 3 and above. It's called the maze. And this is a 3-minute time task where kids are presented with, again, a grade level reading passage. They do this sitting on a computer. It's an independent task. They read the passage to themselves, and every 7th word is omitted, and they have a choice of 3 words, a drop down to insert in to make the passage make sense. So this is a very kind of like basic comprehension assessment, looking at mostly literal comprehension. So can the student reading it make the passage make sense by selecting the right word to fill in the blank? So at grades 4, 5, and we're using it in some 6th grades, it's just that oral reading fluency and that maze passage that is the screening. And in the earlier grade levels, it includes that decoding work. We get amazing, and sometimes we'll have to bring, after we're just doing our benchmarks right now, we can bring some data to show, but MClass gives us instructional recommendations based on those screening results. So very specific skills-based lesson plans that we can use for kids. It also has an entire system where it builds sequenced lesson plans, 10-day cycles of interventions based on kids' needs. So this is something we're going to be trying with our tier 2 and 3 support. So thinking about through RTI, kids who are at high risk of reading failure, how are you intervening early with really specific targeted skills work? Progress monitoring built in. So every 2 to 4 weeks, kids that scored below or well below on the benchmark will be progress monitored in the area where they need the development in reading first. So thinking about taking kids back on the developmental kind of continuum in reading and working at the first point of failure, right? So if a child is still learning how to decode words that include short vowels and blends, working there and not progress monitoring them in like grade level reading comprehension, because we're targeting the intervention in blending sounds and short vowels. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
I said just one follow-up
Yeah.
question. And just before you go to middle school
Yeah,
and
yeah,
before we go to other
yeah.
questions, just like, can you just say like the when and the how? So like now everybody's been assessed, which is great.
Yeah.
We know what level everybody's at, who needs help, who might be at risk for reading failure. And then, so does it happen individually, in groups? Is it a daily thing? So kind of, yeah, can you just say a little bit just so people understand how that
Yeah.
translates?
So all of that analysis is like happening now at both grade level and building level. I would say at both the building and grade level. How that teaching happens is a couple different ways. So all classroom teachers have access to this information for their classroom. So when we think about daily, kind of our tier 1 literacy instruction that happens for all kids, there's kind of a whole group component to that. And then there is always differentiated small group work that happens as part of that. So teachers using that information for their classrooms to drive those small group lessons, right? So that's one place that information is being used. And then we're looking across grade levels to say, okay, who are the kids that need additional teaching on top of that? And we're scheduling that at the elementary into a block called WIN, or What I Need, which is a 30-minute period that we have scheduled into all of our building-wide schedules for each grade level, where the focus of that time is no new teaching or no new tier 1 information is being taught to kids. So kids aren't missing out, but it's a time when we provide targeted instruction and intervention for students. And so we're using that M-class data across grade levels to group students for additional targeted instruction. Kids that don't need additional intervention during that time will be getting extension activities, right? So they may be participating in a book group with peers and meeting with a teacher maybe less frequently during that time, but every student is basically working on what they need, and nobody is missing out on, let's say, the social studies content, because we're pulling them to do a small group.
Hi.
Hi.
So does the WIN half hour take the place of the old Title I or extra reading time that occurred when kids showed that they were at a certain percentile or below on the curriculum assessments?
So I would say kind of. What it really is designed to do, something that happens and has happened in some of our buildings over the years, is that we want to help kids, right? So we schedule groups and interventions throughout the day, but sometimes that pulls kids out of the classroom, right? When really important teaching is being taught, which is also kind of counterproductive, right? So if we pull you out of the math lesson or we pull you out of the science lesson to teach you how to read, right, you're missing out on important content and knowledge building that's really essential also for helping you to become a better reader. So just committing to scheduling that time into the day, right, is something that has been happening in some of our buildings and not others. So we made a commitment as a district that that's going to be scheduled into every grade level and every building. So
that's to be done by the classroom teacher or in combination with a reading teacher, or who's carrying that out?
Yeah, what happens the win. So at its best, and I will say like we are working on this, right? So
Okay.
at its best, and I'm meeting with some principals tomorrow to talk about this, right? Like scheduling as many resources as you can during that time to the grade level is a way to maximize your ability to meet as many kids as possible where needed, right? So it's this dance between having people available to lead different groups, whether it be an intensive reading intervention or a math reteaching or a whatever, while also balancing that with our commitment to co-teaching, right, and integrated co-teaching, right? So if we have a reading teacher who is working in win time all day, they're not available then to be in classrooms during the magnetic reading lesson or the really great reading lesson. So it's this dance of how to best utilize all of the resources we have available. So it's a collaborative, I would say it's collaboration across grade level teams of the classroom teachers, the reading teachers, and special ed teachers assigned to that grade level.
What percentage of classrooms would you guess are currently actually getting their half hour of win time in? Because you and I have both been around a long time, and I've never heard a teacher say, I always have an extra half an hour
Yeah.
of time.
So it's not, yeah, it's not an extra. I mean, it's not extra. Our day has not gotten any longer,
Right.
right? It's a commitment
But
to
there
how
wasn't
we're
a blank spot
using
there
time.
needing to be filled with that,
No,
yeah.
no, it's a commitment to how we're using time. I think at the elementary this year, we have tightened up our kind of ask for schedules and how they look throughout the day, given teachers some more guidance about how long different chunks of the day should be, how long lunch and recess is, trying to bring some consistency to allow for this time. So I know it is scheduled everywhere, right? I think
That's a start.
yeah, that, you know, this is when we think about kind of accountability and program monitoring, that's something that we'll be looking at over the next 6 to 8 weeks, right? As folks get up and running, right? We're just figuring out what kids need during win time. So like in the next 6 weeks, like, are we able to walk through a building and talk to a principal about, okay, when is win time happening? Entering classrooms and seeing it happening, talking with teams, right? So I think that is the work of the next 6 to 8 weeks, is seeing how it's going, where it's not happening, and what needs to happen to support it in becoming true.
Last, I think a quick one. And how are parents informed of how this is happening at a parent-teacher conference, or how do parents know that their child is having trouble in a particular area that's going to be targeted?
Yeah, so I would say a couple of different ways. Absolutely at parent-teacher conferences. So those don't happen until December, however. So, a kind of a must-do that teachers have and buildings have is that any time that we're going to be providing kind of additional intervention to or additional instruction to a student outside of what everybody gets, is that there needs to be communication with the family, right? There needs to be, whether it be a phone call home, an email, right? That the family always needs to be involved in that. It doesn't mean that there'll necessarily be a meeting, but letting folks know about why we think this is important, how it's going to be done, and then how the family will be notified about how the student is doing.
Right, thank you.
Yeah.
No, it's okay.
You're being saved.
You're getting tended to. Dun, 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 dun.
We have our local friends here today too, so they might be able to add. Just thinking about middle school. We don't currently have a universal screening at the middle school. M class goes through 6th grade, so I just have spent the last week talking with 6th grade teachers at DeWitt. They just screened all their kids. So Boynton is also going to try that. So
That's good.
extending that resource that we have available to us into the 6th grade. To help inform placement of students in ELA labs, in reading classes, and also thinking about how we can incorporate just instructional strategies that would be good for students that are struggling or that are essential for kids that are struggling, but good for all kids. We were talking about fluency practice, add to it today, and how some simple routines in the daily classroom could really help some of our struggling readers. So that's happening. The other piece is a commitment in our SEPs of developing common assessments. And to start with, we're just looking at our core subject areas. So thinking about ELA, math, science, and social studies. These would be teacher developed as teams of teachers across to look at prioritize learning standards at several points throughout the year. So thinking like maybe after first marking period, midterm, so that we have a common measure of all of our students at a grade level to look across and say, how are they doing, right? And who's struggling, who's excelling, what happened perhaps differently for those kids, right? Is it that one teacher taught this one way or a different way that we could learn from? And then students who have not yet met those prioritized learning standards, what supports can we put in place to help them meet those by the end of the year? So that using that data to, again, inform placement into support labs, thinking about ninth period extended day programming that we're funding through the SEPs. So just having better data to inform which kids we're prioritizing for extra support and then what we're actually doing during that time. So sometimes it's like you got the kids in the lab, right? But then we're not exactly clear on what supports they need exactly to move them forward. So having these common assessments will help us be more intentional in that support. And that would be something we're really looking, the measure of success this year is, did we make the assessments? Did we give them? And did we have those analysis meetings afterwards to respond, right?
That would be a great future curriculum topic if it goes according to plan. I mean, I'd very much like to see those and see some of the outcomes. That sounds very interesting and good to check in on because we talked a lot about how to measure standards, and obviously there are many different ways to measure standards, but this sounds like a really good way to measure them across schools and classes.
Absolutely. Common assessments and strong PLC practices are one of the they lead to success when done well.
I'd actually like to ask a question about those assessments. Because I wonder, it just kept screaming out to me when you said timed tasks for students. And I think about the students who might not have a 504 IEP where having a clock ticking makes them just shut down. And I know our teachers are really smart, but and great and able to adapt, but I just wonder how we're looking to make sure those students who might not perform well with timed things with anxiety are actually assessed in an accurate way. And then also, we're talking about measures of success, but success looks different for so many students. So how are we accommodating when it's not really written that a student might need accommodations yet? How can we make sure we're getting the right measure of how that each student is doing?
So thinking about the M class or DIBEL specifically, there's uncomfortable tension there because it is a standardized assessment with standardized protocols for administering, right, including the timed nature of it. Now, one thing, knowing your kids and knowing those students that have anxiety. So first of all, the timer never faces the kid, right? The timer is teacher facing on the laptop or whatever they're taking. So a strategy that is shared during training is that kiddos that have high anxiety, let them finish. Don't stop. You can stop recording when the minute is up, right? Stop taking the data, but just let the kid finish the page, right? We say that when reading a passage, if the kid is going to freak out when you say, stop reading here, great, just let them read the whole thing, So that is a kind of a workaround in those standardized things. So because an extended time is not an allowable accommodation on M class because it is a measure of fluency and a standardized measure of fluency. The other piece I want to, this is a universal screening. It's one piece, right? So all the other things we're doing. So we think about our reading comprehension program, thinking about magnetic reading, has both daily written work that kids do in response to the text they read. It has embedded unit assessments. So those are other ways that we look for students to shine and to apply their reading, like foundational skills to actually connected text and being able to use that reading to think and communicate about what they're reading. That's the ultimate goal, right? So that's part of it. And in those assessments, we do use accommodations, both when kids have them on 504s or IEPs, but when I'm working with teachers and we talk about when it's not a high stakes test, we want to know what kids know. So give the accommodation, even if it's not on a piece of paper, right? So if we're trying to find out if a kid can read a text and make sense of it, if writing is a barrier for them, talk to them. Have them record their response on an iPad in Seesaw or something. So thinking about ways that we can allow kids to respond differently to show what they know anytime that it's not in a standardized, controlled assessment setting.
And how is that information then, if it's not, because you have to write down what is actually standardized, right? How can that information be shared both with families, but also anecdotally? So we're seeing, literacy rates might not be great, but when we look at, like, are we collecting data on when those accommodations are made? So we know that, a slow reader is a slow reader. They're actually able to read. They're just reading slower. Like,
So absolutely, I mean, that is the work of teachers all the time, right? Is collecting that anecdotal notes and communicating. I think that's the power of conversation. So thinking about a parent-teacher conference where you can hear that and hear that explained versus when you look at a report you're going to get from M-Class that says, here are the scores and what it means. So there's I can't say we have like a systematic, there's not like a form that everybody is filling out. But I know that is a practice that's used, thinking about, even the M-Class and the training, they encourage teachers to keep a notebook by them as they give the assessments so they can jot down those sorts of things, right? As they're working with kiddos. Yeah.
thank you.
I think, and that's such a really good question. And I mean, I could talk a lot about it. I will not talk a lot about it, but it's what I do for a living. So, I mean, I have a lot to say about it, but I mean that, and again, I always bring this back, but that's why multimodal assessment is so important, and never making any clinical decisions based on one data point. Cause exactly your question, right? Like, under what circumstances can somebody read? Well, maybe when it's timed, they're in the 3rd percentile. When it's untimed, they're in the 80th percentile. And that obviously says a lot about the conditions. So that's why so anyway, just as we're thinking about assessment and collecting data and trying to tell a story, pulling lots of pieces of data together is always the best way to do it.
And I think I am guilty of this in my language too. And I just caught like, I am trying to be very careful about not labeling kids as non-readers just because they can't decode. So just because we have an assessment that says they're not able to independently, read the words on the page does not mean that they're not capable about thinking about connected words and texts and ideas, right? So that's language I'm really working on, are kids that are struggling to decode versus kids can't read.
Lynn, can you tell me a little bit about the professional development? I saw where you said that it lays more information out, but the truth is that we wish we had like endless hours, I'm sure, to be able to work with teachers and help develop skills and help them learn from each other, so on and so forth. But we don't, obviously, and there's a lot of like new, really great things that you all are doing. What exactly does the PD look like? What is required versus what is encouraged? How are you kind of like meeting the needs of different teachers based on different experience and levels and things like that?
So this is an area that I think we learned a lot from teachers last year in their feedback around the Eureka Math Squared rollout, and also from what folks told us as we piloted programs last year. So an ask from our elementary teachers when they knew we were going to be implementing new curriculum and new assessments was, first of all, that any decisions regarding those new things be made before the summer, right? So we really committed to by April making decisions. and then that professional development be available prior to summer, during summer, and in early fall, whatever initial teachers needed to be successful in getting started with implementation be offered at those 3 distinct time periods, so that teachers could access it in a way that fit in their schedule and also felt like it gave them the amount of time they needed to prep, right? Some teachers are like, I don't care, I'll pick up the book and I can do it tomorrow, right? Other teachers are like, I need months, I need time to think this through, right? So we listened, and for our elementary literacy, if you look at that chart, you'll see that for magnetic reading, there is a 1-day launch training that was required for all 3rd through 5th grade educators. That includes general educators, ENL teachers, special educators, and reading teachers that work with grades 3 through 5. There for M class, all elementary educators of all types, right? Whether you're gen ed or special ed or reading or ENL, attended a 1-day initial training for that. These were all facilitated by the vendors that sell these. So we access their professional development teams. And at K2, since we are still working on identifying a comprehension assessment, we developed an internal PD that was responsive to what teachers said they needed and how to implement those small groups that they're doing, that differentiated skills-based instruction. Teachers said, our K2 teachers told us last year during the pilot, hey, this is great, this comprehension stuff, but we need to know what to do differently, the shift away from guided reading to skills-based instruction. So we designed an internal PD that we asked all teachers to go to K2. And it's working. I'll say, like, we just finished the last magnetic reading training on last Wednesday, and we have about 11 educators in grades 3 through 5 that have not been trained at this point, which for us is really amazing, right? 11 out of about 90. In M class, we trained over 170 teachers since June, right? So we have, I think, have really good reach and participation in those. And it really was just providing options and laying those out clearly for teachers. I think another thing we are really trying to do is be intentional about how we're using our district-wide PLC days. So like the work around common assessments at the middle schools, we're scheduling that into our October 25th PLC day to kick that work off, right? So all teachers, that's contractual time that we already have when we have folks together. So how can we leverage that to move the work and engage teachers in the PD that we need everybody to be part of?
And how, sorry, were you gonna?
Oh, no, I just want to make sure because we have a lot of people here for the next topic.
Oh,
So
sorry.
just, no, I mean, we
Okay.
can talk about it for so long. I want to.
That's
also.
fair.
Okay.
Okay, this will be my last question then. How do you make how do you all like determine that teachers are actually gaining the skill? Like there's one thing to just participate in the PD and it seems like not super frequent and like how do you actually make sure that they're really getting it? Like teacher prep programs are now integrating the science of reading throughout the years that people are in those programs because it's an entire science. How do we, I know that this answer is no, but like, we're not judging it based on like how successful students are with it. So I'm just curious how you all are making sure that that's actually.
So a couple of things we're trying to do, right?
Mhm.
So first of all is being, I would say at the professional development experience level, ensuring that we're collecting exit ticket data from all participants
Mhm.
about kind of the impact of the day and any remaining question supports they have.
Mhm.
So that's something that's part of the PD offered by our vendors and we're doing for our own internal PD. A second piece, our principals, our elementary principals receive training in all of these programs this year and we'll have follow-up throughout so that they have some specific walkthroughs to look for as they're in classrooms, right? So they know what should this look like, right? And where can I do some coaching into that? And we have also embedded in our PD plans for M class and magnetic reading this year that when we put together those PD contracts, we embedded follow-up coaching. So the week of October 20 5th, I think it is. We have 2 coaches coming from Amplify. They're going to spend 1 day at each of our elementary schools meeting with grade level teams to look at data together, hear how teams kind of interpreted that and use that to inform the groups they're working with and to give some feedback and additional planning for that. We'll have magnetic reading trainers in buildings throughout kind of the late fall and winter to do walkthroughs. And those are non-evaluative, where they would then provide just feedback to the teachers they observe about glows and grows. And then also feedback to us as a district about what are some kind of common patterns that they're seeing that could benefit from future professional development and support around. So that's what we're trying to do.
Great, thank you.
So I think we'll return to the topic of professional development because I feel like we probably have some more questions about it, and I hate to cut anything short. Ideally, we could just let each topic go until we were all done with all our questions.
Mhm.
But we have one more topic for tonight, and we have a lot of people who came tonight to join us at the table. So we're gonna shift our conversation to our second discussion item, 4.3, which is the grading protocol for high school credit-bearing classes taught in the middle school. And we have some guests.
Microphone.
Oh yeah, everybody please use the mic. And if you guys all want to just introduce yourselves to the people at home who might not know you.
Hi, I'm Lauren Wright. I'm the principal at Boynton Middle School.
Kathleen Cole, I'm a math teacher at Boynton Middle School.
Dan McGrath, principal at DeWitt.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tara Kaiser. I am the associate principal at Boynton.
All right. So to start us off, we are here to just sort of talk through and share a little bit, not so much about the history of how we got to standards-based grading at the middle school, but more so specifically looking at the grading that is being used at high school level courses that are taught at the middle school. Okay, so just to review, we had come last year towards the end of the year and talked a little bit about the change and the move from 0 through 100, which really stemmed going back to COVID years during the pandemic. We, immediately identified that we needed to make a change to grading policy while students were experiencing, and all of us were experiencing this great change. And we wanted to, create a grading system that felt more equitable and was responsive to, what students were experiencing at that time. Coming out of that, our educators were like, hold on. We just, in a couple of months, made a change to something that has been in place for years and years and years. And we shouldn't just go back and jump back into what we had before. And let's look at creating something that feels more equitable for students. And that really is where things kind of kicked off. And that, like I said, was during the pandemic. And now we are several years in. And this change happened at both middle schools. And has been a really beautiful thing, because one of the things that stands out to me as I'm watching educators and how they're implementing it is not just how they're grading work, but it's really changed how they're teaching, how they're evaluating student work and how students understand what's expected of them, which is huge. So this gives you just a little snapshot of what formerly was on a report card, which versus what we are moving towards. And you can see there's far more information that is able to be provided when you're looking at this version of a standards-based grading report card. Lynn, I don't know if you want to add anything about the second version. No.
Just to note, in the first report card, you're just getting a number and you don't know where that number comes from. In the second report card, you can see the standards that are being taught. Again, that's more information that we're providing. So if I see the score and I have a student coming home with a 2 in one variable statistics, then I can provide support with one variable statistics, whereas previously in marking period 1, I saw that they had a 76. And so we are giving more information that caregivers can use to support their children and also direct a conversation with teachers. Like, I noticed that they're doing really well on simplifying radicals, but what can I do with properties of exponents and one variable statistics to support at home? Or are there other resources? So it helps guide a conversation for the grading.
I also want to extend that to conversations with children, right? Because when we are using a standards-based grading model, kids, like Lauren said, are focusing more on what they're learning and less the assignment. Traditionally, it was, did you turn in this thing, or how did you do on this test? And now the conversations are, how are you understanding one variable statistics? This is clearly an area of struggle. Why don't we talk about it? It's building on conversations with children when we're talking about support, like support labs or coming in after school. We're really targeting our language with kids and adults towards what is being taught instead of what is being completed.
One other thing that I wanted to add, huge kudos to Kathleen for leading this work. But you can see there that the standards are kind of broken up into marking periods, right? Like time that it is focused on. But one of the things that the math department has really been looking at and moving towards is allowing students, like removing some of the time limits that used to come with the traditional 0 through 100 scale. And so students are looking at their progress throughout the whole year. So we're looking at it as 40 weeks instead of like, what did you learn in a marking period? If it takes you a little bit longer, you can go back to that. There's time for retakes, revisiting a certain standard, and it might take you longer to get there. But if you've mastered it, and you still get credit for doing that, which is not something that we saw traditionally in the past. So that's been a very large change, again, for students, their experience, how and when they're able to show what they've learned. Again, this is just reiterating the timeline of things. So 2020 was the year when we began to make some shifts. And then the 2020 to 21 school year, I believe at DeWitt, they went full school using the 1 through 4 grading system. At Boynton, we had a pilot in 7th grade. But by that next school year, we were all utilizing things with standards-based grading across both school buildings. That year, we started with the understanding that we weren't quite ready to dive into the high school level courses as far as using standards-based grading. But our educators were so excited about this opportunity that they were like, we're ready in world language. So they began piloting it there, and it really just took off from there. World language was the first of the group, and then algebra, and then earth science in last school year.
So once we decided that we were going to switch, we had to come up with, so these are the courses that are high school level courses at the middle school. And then we had to decide, okay, what is going to give credit? We have a different system. We knew that 65 and above would give credit. Yeah, should be more here. There it goes. So we have this 1 through 4 scale. This is what we are using to determine how students are doing. And we need to get this to high school level credit. So what we decided is that if you are scoring level 4s for it's the mode of your scores throughout the year, you are going to receive credit in that high school level course. If you have a mode of level 3, you are going to get your credit. Now, if you have a level 2, which you can see, it shows a developmental level of understanding, and it requires some support. So we recognize that just getting level 2s throughout the course of the year wasn't quite enough to earn that credit, because of that requires support. However, if you pass the Regents exam or the proficiency exam, you're not receiving any support there. So that's a way for you to get credit at the end of the year. And that level 2 throughout the year shows that you needed that extra time in order to master and understand the content. Now, you're not going to get a credit if you get a level 1. That's your mode for the year. And if you get a level 2 and you fail the Regents exam or the proficiency, that is communicating to us that you haven't really understood and developed the ability to do this without those supports yet. So we just said that's not going to be enough for us in order to attain credit. And then the next part is we have to take these two systems that don't work well together, and we have to try to blend them together, since we have a different model at the high school. And so we're looking at, okay, we've got our 1 through 4, and then we've got our 0 to 100 scale. And this nuance between what is an A minus and what is an A and what is an A plus. We don't have that nuance in a grading scale. So what we had to do is we had to think about a conversion. How are we going to take what a student is doing in middle school and give it to this GPA calculation? So I believe we talked to Lansing to get some ideas from the district about other districts on how things are being done. And this is where we landed. So if you get a level 4 in your middle school, high school level course, it's going to correlate to a 95 on the IHS grading scale, which is going to be a 4.0 in terms of GPA. And so you can read through the scale, but we had to make this decision about how do we take these two systems that don't work well and be thoughtful, because we do want students to have this represented in their GPA. And then shifting back, it's very difficult to make this shift. So we have been redesigning our courses, talking about these quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3 grades. It changes. So that idea of it's a continuum. So you see a level 2 for exponents in quarter 1, but they do retakes, and you see that it changes to a level 4 in the 3rd quarter. So it's also school-wide commitments, lots of time spent working the way back would undo a lot of that time. And then you've got teachers who teach middle school level courses and then high school level courses. So asking them to switch back between two different systems is difficult to manage. So that's why we're saying going back to a 0 to 100 scale would be a challenging thing for our middle school teachers.
I think it's also important to note that that is also difficult for students and families, especially as we were making this shift, when there was that sort of living in both worlds, that became extremely confusing for students, and created lots, of questions about, I'm thinking about this course and that's graded this way. And then I also have these courses which are graded a different way. And there's just a much larger sense of clarity, having the entire building be using one grading system.
Also, the standards-based grading is a representation of what we know kids can do and how they can think about their own learning. So when we're talking about teaching them that perseverance pays off, right? And try again, and we're going to support you in learning, not just achieving on a particular assignment. Saying that in most of their classes, but not all of them, is a mixed message. And we really are clear about our commitment to helping kids be learners, and we think that this is really supporting that.
We have Kathleen here to tell about.
Just a couple of things, as I'm listening to all of this. And for me, like when we went to the standards-based grading, it came about at a time where there was a lot of talk about change and becoming more equitable. And it wasn't just a change in like 1 through 4 as opposed to percentages. It was an overhaul, a total change. So when we did percentages, most family or teachers did like 30% of your grade is your quizzes, 25% of your grade is homework, 10% is participation. Did you complete a notebook? Different things like that, right? Became part of your grade, but that felt very inequitable. And it wasn't standards-based. It wasn't, are you at a level of understanding the standards for, say, math in 8th grade? It referred to a lot of different things. And so taking that away and just really honing in on what the standards are and does that student know the standards is where we turn to, which was a huge mind shift. It was a big change for a lot of us. So like my students still get homework. I give homework every night. It doesn't directly count towards their grade if they do or don't do it. They've learned that they need to do the homework because that's how they practice and that's how they learn. They don't need to do it to get a grade. So it kind of puts a whole new perspective on a lot of that. So I think it's bigger than just the 1 through 4 and the percentages. I think a lot changed for a lot of teachers. I just want to reiterate the whole, like the retakes and the being open all year, which both Lauren and Tara said, but really trying to get kids to understand that once you've done a topic and you've assessed on it, doesn't mean you move on, right? It's there. You can continue to grow and learn and show us understanding throughout the entire year. So a student's grade at any point is a snapshot of where they are at that time. So yes, we report at 10 weeks and we report at 30 weeks and we report at 40 weeks, but that grade is just a snapshot at that time of where a student is at. So at any point, you can change that snapshot. You can go back and reassess and show us that you've learned something. Just trying to really encourage kids to grow and continue to learn and not to just be like, well, that's over with, that marking period's done, I can do nothing about that. Not true. So like, as you look, that report card that was put up showed the 4 marking periods, like Lauren was saying, but it's nice because as the year goes on, yes, we've learned more materials, but all of those standards are current standards and current grades. They're not like old standards and old grades. They continually change, and trying to teach kids that that's okay. And we want you to continue to grow and learn and to continue to change those, I think is important.
Can I ask you a quick question just about your comments? What was your name? I'm so sorry.
It's okay, Kathleen.
Kathy?
Kathleen Cole. Yep.
Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I just want to clarify one thing that you said. Did you say that if they do master some piece of it, that they are not permitted to move on to something else because instead they're
No,
supposed to?
So we continue to move on throughout the year. So like we started with some integer work and now we're solving equations. A student maybe got a 2 on integer work, but as we do solving equations, they're going to continue to practice that. So now they can show through that or taking a new assessment that now I understand those integers. I can go back and change that grade at any point. Nothing's ever You're never stuck, and we don't ever go down in grades, but you always have that opportunity to show understanding.
I'm sure you, lots of
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all,
Sorry, I
Yeah,
just
go on.
want to make sure,
Yeah.
'cause there's one more, I was waiting to ask questions. There's
Yeah,
one
yeah.
more slide. and click this at the
Oh.
end. I want to be finished.
oh, yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not
yeah.
trying to follow the rules out.
Well, I understand.
Does
You're
anyone
doing
have
great.
any questions?
Are there any questions?
Oh, okay.
I have
good.
questions.
Okay.
It shows a lot of what was talked about.
Okay.
So I'm not sure that.
Oh, okay.
This is what kids and families get, right? This is describes how.
Sure, this is what kids and families get. And I work with an amazing teacher, Andrew Trevisi, who has created a spreadsheet that kids, he calls it the grade calculator. So every kid opens their own copy of this grade calculator, and it breaks down that there are 6 topics with subtopics underneath them, and it's all listed. It kind of looks like the report card you saw, because he also created that. And kids at any point in time can see what their grade is and keep track of what their scores are. So we shared that with families and students. And so at any point, a kid can plug in their grades, and they can keep it all year long to sort of see what they need to do to, the pieces they need to get up to a 3 or 4. We encourage them to get out of the 1s and 2s everywhere. You need to shoot for 3s and 4s is what we tell them.
Yeah, so I appreciate everybody coming in and, presenting this. I mean, I have so many things that I'd like to say kind of in response. I mean, I have a different philosophy. I mean, I guess I'll just start where, I have a sense that the high school credit bearing classes, and this is just my opinion, of course, should be graded like high school classes, which doesn't really ruin the standards-based grading model for the middle school. I mean, all the other classes, would continue to be standards-based grades. I have some objections. I mean, I think I'll just say a couple of them, and maybe you can say some things in response. One thing that sticks out, this is very minor, but like the maximum grade is 95. There are some students, at other schools who are taking algebra who might be getting, 99s or 98s. And if you're feeling like you're particularly astute at math and competitive, and people are looking at all of your math scores, I feel like there's a cap. The second thing that really stands out to me is that the conversion doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It feels a little bit arbitrary. And like when you say there's no credit for 2s and a failed regents, but you still get a score of 75 on the report card, which is a C, that just kind of stands out as an inconsistency, in the sense, because I guess what you're trying to do is you're trying to take an ordinal scale and you're trying to convert that into an interval scale, which is very hard to do, I guess, like in assessment and psychology and other forms of statistics. It's very hard to go from lower order scales to higher order scales. It's easy to go from higher order scales to lower order scales. So then you're sort of coming up with a matrix, and then the matrix is open, I think, to a lot of subjectivity. I also have the sense that, like in the first slide, if you go back to the beginning where you were sort of talking about, when you have standards-based grades, you can look at all of the different, areas. Actually, the second slide, sorry, maybe the third, where you were showing the standards-based grade versus just the number in the marking period. Oh yeah, slide 4, yeah. I was off by many. So I guess with the standards-based grades, you're sort of showing, oh, okay, we have property of exponents, that's a 2, simple radicals is a 4. But I mean, you could expand that as well with the grades and just say properties of exponents, they got an 85, simplifying radicals, 72, and leave it at that. So, I mean, it doesn't have to be as reductive as one number versus many numbers. It can still be many numbers versus many numbers, but the numbers would just be, 0 to 100. So I guess those are just some of the concerns that I have, and I'm thinking of it in terms of a student who's taking a trajectory of math classes, applying for college. People are looking at all of their scores. They're seeing, geometry has a score, pre-calculus has a score, and then algebra, just has this converted score. And I guess to my sensibility, it just feels easier rather than trying to take one system and convert it into another system, just in these very special classes, not for the entire middle schools. Why not just use the numbers in those classes? And I know you said lots of reasons why you think maybe not. So I think those are just some things that came to mind initially as counterpoints. I don't know if there's anything anybody would like to sort of say in response, and then other people should ask questions.
So I guess the first thing I will say is that when we made this transition to standards-based grading in the high school level credit-bearing classes taught in the middle school, it's a very wordy description for a class. We initially did not plan to incorporate those into the high school GPA. We were just looking at credit acquisition, right? We're just looking at credit acquisition. So that first kind of conversion was the only piece we were planning to, because we didn't feel like it was appropriate to convert. That was an ask made of us, and we understand why, right? And it's a practice used kind of throughout our region, and I think throughout the country, like how you make those conversions. But in the high school, when classes transfer in from other institutions, whether it be from a different school district, and they aren't included in the GPA. It is just a credit determination based on a review of the transcript. So I think when we made this transition at the middle school, we were really thinking about these as transfer credits, a class taken at another institution that scored differently than the high school. And I understand there's a difference of opinion there, right? And so I think when you say, I think we struggle with many of the same things about what is the correct conversion to a 100-point scale. Now, one thing to clarify is that on the transcript or on a student's report card, it will not report a kid that took Algebra 1 in 8th grade at Boynton Middle School. It will say level 4. It will not say 95. The conversion is behind the scenes for GPA calculations only.
No, I get that, but I just then they miss the opportunity to have that number if they wanted to have a number. I mean, that's my only concern. Like, so if somebody wants to show, or maybe algebra is going to be a better math year than geometry, and so now they have a lower geometry score, and they had this great algebra score, but now the algebra score doesn't make it to the eyes of the college admissions people. I mean, I think that's my concern about it, like people are missing out on an opportunity.
How was it treated before, though? Was it transferred as a credit, or was it transferred towards the grade GPA pre-standards-based grading?
It was a credit, and scores were on the report card.
Yeah. So they used to have the
Yep.
score.
Okay. So this is a big change.
Yeah.
Kind of.
It is. The other thing that the region score is reported. So we are reporting a level 4, not the 95, but the Regents exam is also reported. So if you have a student that is looking for, that number, it can be demonstrated through the Regents score with a high level grade. So you can see the level 4. We provide a description of what it means to be a level 4 for people that are reading the transcripts. And there's also that Regents level score that is on there as well, which would be out of a 100-point scale.
Right. And that has advantages and disadvantages. It's good to have a score, but if you have a bad day and your Regents score is low, and imagine a semester where you get 4, 4, 4, 4, and then you have a lousy Regents day and you get a 72. Again, they're not going to see, somebody's missing out on an opportunity to have 96, 95, 96, 92, 75.
I think a couple of things. If it was really like a really awful day, kids can and do retake it. And with the standards-based grading mindset, they would generally want to do that. The other thing is if students are really gearing up for a career in engineering or something, and they're looking at math scores, I don't know that the 8th grade one is going to hold the most weight. For me, it probably did. Somebody who's going to MIT, probably not. So I don't know that this is the most critical math class. And not to say that it isn't important, it totally is. But many other schools across the country have standards-based grading for their high school calculus, a I don't know, I don't work at the high school. So the highest level calculus class, there are descriptions that go in with the report card, right? That you can submit to colleges saying this is what the 95 was the highest I could have achieved in that particular class. And so that is something that, should a student be certainly concerned about that they can submit that.
I'm with you, Tara. The pinnacle of my math success was ninth grade algebra as well, so it's all downhill after that. But my question is the 1 through 4 grading scale an integral part of standard-based grading? Because I don't understand how that happened, and that's because of my weak performance in math in the past. But if somebody could explain why you couldn't have perfectly effective standard-based grading with a 1 to 100 scale, I would love to hear that.
I think one thing that's in the research around grading and about grading scales is this idea of precision, right? So the 100-point scale really came about in this drive, I think, for precision. But what research shows is that humans are not capable of distinguishing between 100 levels of performance, right? So when we look at a grading scale, the difference between a 96 in a class and a 98, we don't really know what that means. That is a mathematical accumulation of points, right? So at the heart of standards-based grading is having rubrics that describe clearly what students can do, what they know and can do and can show for each standard to achieve at each level. So trying to articulate what the performance on 2 variable statistics would look like at 100, 99, 98, right? It's just impossible, and it's impossible for humans to distinguish between that many levels. So the recommendation is really between 3 and 5 levels of performance is what humans can realistically, humans being the graders, right? The educators, distinguish between performance. So the 100-point scale is really, it gives the illusion of precision, but it's not really telling us much of anything about the difference in students' learning.
I'd love to jump in with a quick question, and this is a bit of a shift from how we're talking about it now, but performance-based grading and being able to kind of break it down into the individual pieces, understandably, allows for you to identify exactly where a student needs help. So I would presume that that would mean that on average, a student that is being graded, even forgetting what number is being used, but is being graded by a teacher who is thinking about it in this way, would hopefully on average perform better by the end because the instruction would be targeted to what they needed. So I'm curious if we have looked at data comparing an 8th grade student who took Algebra 1 at in middle school with this grading and approach to instruction versus a high school student in 9th grade who is being graded. What is it called?
0 to 100.
Yes.
On an interval scale.
On an interval scale. Have we looked at all at if on average those students are actually at a higher level of expertise or competence in algebra? Do we?
Or you could do a pre-post. You could do before you switch to standard-based grading.
They haven't switched.
And
to
use
algebra yet.
region scores.
They haven't,
outcome.
that's what.
Yeah.
Oh, well, is there anything that we Oh, you have, yeah.
Oh, sorry,
That's
Emily, I'm wrong.
Last year was the first year, so okay, it was.
It would be an interesting, have we even thought about doing that? It would be interesting as an experiment, given that it's a course being taken at 2 different schools with 2 different grading systems.
I thought about that. I think 2 years ago before algebra started, I was thinking this was a great opportunity. We didn't move forward. And part of it was because the group of children who are taking algebra in 8th grade are generally advanced.
Mhm.
Kids who are taking algebra in 9th grade are right on target, right? That's where they should be. There are also co-taught classes. There's kids with support. It's not the same group.
Mhm.
And so if we are looking at that, I think we would have to look at the same cohort of children, right? The beginning of year versus the end of year, or something along those lines.
Tara, actually, similar to Emily's question is, because we're running out of time, so I don't mean to interrupt. It's just basically Emily's question, but more widely varied. So we started this widely, very recently. What are we seeing in the student population? And I'm curious the feedback we're getting as well, because when I think about this, I think about parents who are very involved, who probably want the 0 to 100 scale and don't understand this. And then I'm thinking about the students who probably really benefit from this, who are the ones who just really don't have the caregivers overseeing them. But do we have any data or I forget the word I'm trying to use, anecdotal information about how these students are transitioning from level 1 to 4 and then going on to grades based in like, is it confusing for them? Do they understand the needs? Like, what are we seeing? How's the performance?
Sure. Well, every kid in the middle school is going from standards-based grading to the 0 to 100 scale. So I think the high school can share information about that. One metric that we have not talked about that I don't want to misspeak, I don't know all of the information, but I do believe that our numbers have increased in students who can access these classes, and the number of students from marginalized groups has also increased when providing multiple opportunities for retakes and different type of instruction, right? With a different lens, we're catching more kids to be in advanced classes earlier.
Thank you, Tara. And you said something like, so we're sitting here talking about standards-based grades versus this 0 through 100 scale, kind of different things, right? Like you said, we could do a 0 through 100 scale and still do standards-based grading. So like, they're two separate things. Like with standards-based grading, we made huge changes in the way we grade and where our grades come from. Nothing to do with the numbers. I think that, to me, that was the big shift. And I think take the numbers out of it. I think standards-based grading has led us down that path of that change.
Well, I think any data, I know that we have to wrap up, but I would love, like, that is so wonderful to hear that that is happening and that you're seeing students matriculate through your school and seeing that by 8th grade, these classrooms are more diverse and have more opportunities for kids that like, if there's any way for us to be able to look at the data around that or to be able to communicate that kind of thing with the community, that we're actually seeing that is really powerful and very, very exciting to hear.
I think pulling the data of enrollment from 2021 to now in our high school credit bearing classes in the middle school will be helpful.
Very cool. Well, thank you all very much.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for coming and for the conversation. And we're going to wrap up our curriculum committee meeting for tonight. And everybody stay tuned for our full board meeting. Thank you.
No.